As a former regulator, I think it's a very bad position to be on the defensive all the time. And that's kind of what I see Web3 not kind of getting out of, is the defensive posture. And we need to, as a space, move towards being more proactive in explaining and showing how what we're doing is good for the world. Like literally, what is the public good? Until we start to tell that story more often and louder, I'm actually really worried.
All right, welcome to another episode of Built on Web3. Our guest on the show today is Shannon Wells, the head of ecosystem growth at Web3 video infrastructure company Livepeer. Shannon, welcome to the show.
Hello, thanks for having me.
I almost said happy Monday because I had a line in there from an interview we did on Monday, but it is Wednesday that we found out earlier today, Thomas.
Yep.
Feels like a Monday.
It's a Monday.
It feels like a Monday. So we start off every interview just kind of talking about Web3 in general and how you think about Web3. It means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. So Shannon, what is Web3 to you?
I have been in what could be considered Web3 for actually over 10 years now. My first job out of university was as a financial sector regulator in Canada's finance department, where I, with colleagues at the Bank of Canada, was looking at Bitcoin as a financial crime. So I've come a long way in what I think Web3 is, what its virtues and vices are.
So the government paid you to tell them why Bitcoin is a crime, and you got so into it that you said, "I'm out of here. I love it."
I was drinking the Kool-Aid. I thought it was evil. I was like, "This is a baby killing machine." And then, left the government to do more like centralized policy stuff at the World Economic Forum. I was there for almost 4 years through their Global Leadership Fellows Program, and as head of Community for North America, actually. So the World Economic Forum mission is improving the state of the world through public-private collaboration, and it does that by bringing together the most verified senior leaders from business, government, and civil society organizations. So this was like back in, I'm dating myself, it was like 2015, and was working with CEOs who were looking at blockchain as like really cool. So then for a while I was in like, so phase one, like crypto's killing babies. Phase two, blockchain is cool, but crypto's evil. And then in like 2017, I met Jeremy Allaire like from Circle in like 2016. And I was like, oh, this is actually interesting. And then like started looking at stable coins. And then I started advising a few stablecoin projects because from a like monetary systems perspective, it made a lot of sense for like fragile economies, why you would want to use crypto-backed stable currencies. And then I started going down the rabbit hole. I learned about proof of stake. I started dating a guy who was like running nodes for different blockchains. And my background's actually like in political science. And my undergraduate was in federal systems and understanding why you would want to have united and divided sovereignty over things. So like when I learned that like crypto bros had come to a realization that human coordination to upgrade technology was important through proof of stake protocol design, I was like, I'm in. And then, I just kind of, I was doing other stuff around then. I was also head of impact investing at Canada's largest startup accelerator called Mars Discovery District in Toronto. So I've always been like super interested in just like how at a human coordination level, we pool resources and decide to do things together. And that's kind of like for me, what Web3 is actually about is if I look at like what I've done in my career, like started off like super centralized, like the idea that it was nation states or, CEOs of, monolithic global corporations who had the resources, wherewithal, legitimacy to make global change. Like crypto, not just from like the economic incentives that you get through like, yeah, crypto tokens, but like the community aspect and the belief that we can, through unique areas of contribution, whether that's like the, decomposed technology stack where we're all like one bit of and I'm happy to talk about like where Livepeer fits into the Web3 tech stack, but
Hmm.
like the cultural element of Web3 where, yeah, we are a decentralized community, like we're a decentralized community of technology users. um and that's what it's about for me.
Yeah. So for listeners that might not understand why Web3 is so powerful for human coordination, can you kind of explain why that, like, why does Web3 empower this ability that we didn't have before?
Hmm. I think it's because even the smallest amount of effort can have a big impact when you pool that. And like fractional ownership, again, this was like the first like primitive of like what the coordination power of, Web3 was about, was like fractional ownership um, in an asset. And I think that through like DAO governance structures and those like next gen tokens, whether that's a social token or an NFT or like new, on-chain verifiable or like verifiable credentials, um, the idea that like you can recognize and acknowledge like even a small contribution to a bigger project, I think that's like what's powerful.
Yeah, and it's such a hard thing to conceptualize and like see if you're not in it, right? Because like once you're in a Discord because you have an NFT and you receive a credential because you do something, it's like really hard to understand what it is until you actually do it.
Yeah, and it's like when I started going down the rabbit hole, I would like spend a lot of different time in Discord communities. And it's like, you do have to find that affinity that makes you want to like use crypto. I think it's, the stickiness is not like just coming to like make a quick buck. It is like finding your people.
Yeah, there's too much, speculation in Web3 and NFTs, and it's nice that we're starting to get away from that. We've been having a lot of conversations about how
Yeah.
like what people think 2023 is going to be, and a lot of people are saying like, well, I hope the speculation goes away.
Yeah. And I guess this gets to like where I'm at in my Web3 journey and what Web3 means to me from Livepeer's perspective. And when I give talks, my first slide is like Web3 is about utility. It's not about speculation. And, what's also cool about what Livepeer is doing and what I think the Web3 technology stack is doing is we are decentralizing and creating competitive markets for like the things that make it possible to use the internet. So like Web 2, like, let's talk about the difference between Web 2 and Web 3. Like in and Web 1, we can like go back to Web 1. Like Web 1 was about like open protocols, open standards, like anyone could, now access this new way of connecting digitally. And then Web 2 was about a business model, where it was like digital business.
Like the
um,
original startup.
yeah, the original startup. How do you create a business on the internet? Like that's what Web 2 was about. And as it turns out, like using the internet, um, is a very expensive enterprise. Like the actual like utilities that make using the internet possible, like data storage, video transcoding, like broadcasting video on the internet, it's super expensive. And one of the reasons why Web 2 is bad and what we're trying to fix in Web 3 is like the internet monopolies like Facebook, Google, like why they have such a high take rate on creator revenue, like why YouTube takes like 75 or 80 cents on every dollar that a creator makes, is not just because it's not only because it's trying to maximize profit, it's also trying to cover its infrastructure costs. So like Twitch, YouTube had to sell to Google in 2008 because it like couldn't cover its costs. Twitch continues to sell at a continues to generate a loss for Amazon because it can't cover its infrastructure costs. And so when you leverage decentralized compute networks through blockchain networks, that cost comes down like 10x. So, Livepeer, if you're using Livepeer's decentralized network to do video transcoding, which is what you need to do to put video on the internet, and I can talk about like what that means, it's 10 times cheaper. And so like as a business, like working on top of Web3, like your cost structure is just fundamentally different. You don't have to take as much creator revenue. And then when you like pair that stack, that decentralized tech stack, with other Web3 primitives that allow users to own and port their own data, that's when you get like new potential for like, I think, infinite creative economic potential.
So when you talk about so this is really cool because we're talking about a pretty practical use case for Web3 here in terms
Mhm.
of decreasing the cost to almost like have business on the internets today, right?
Yeah, totally. The cost of operating a business on the internet is, by orders of magnitude lower, at least in theory, but like we're working to get there really soon with like, again, other decentralized compute primitives, like storage, file sharing, broadcasting, content delivery, like all of these things that are compute intensive. Like how Livepeer started was the realization that like what is like what actually is mining, like blockchain and Ethereum. It's like nodes that have a lot of excess like compute capacity. So like if you're running a blockchain node, you probably had idle GPU capacity. And guess what? Like GPU cards are like what you need to do a whole host of like computational things, like rendering, transcoding, like machine learning, like all of those really critical compute things that have like really practical use cases, like are on these rigs that are all over the world. And why not also tap into those?
Can you kind of explain why? So Livepeer in general is decentralized video, correct? Can you kind of explain like the specifics of how it is 10 times cheaper to build this on Web3 versus Web2? Like I'm trying to figure out like, okay, I get it, but like why is it 10 times cheaper? It's awesome that it is, but why?
So in Web 2, like it's the amount of it's like the computational intensity of like the data and the information on the web, right? Like, so think of like server farms, and like that's the only people who've been able to provide computational resources at a scale that's needed for the world to use the internet the way it uses the internet today are these monopolies who have like large server farms all over the world. So, and they own that. Like, who owns those server farms and who like gets the rewards of those server farms? It's like Jeff Bezos and, a few people. But like, if you literally just like blew up those servers and like the computational dust like fell all over the world, like everyone running a node, like that's what we do is like those centralized server farms become like individual nodes in a global compute network. And so exactly like the engineering behind exactly why that's cheaper, we'll have to get like the head of like engineering at Livepeer
Yeah,
to go into any
yeah.
more like depth on that. But um, the decentralization of compute and the fact that like what are the resources required for me to run a node from my basement? And we have like my partner and I have nodes in our basement, like, and there's like we can unpack the onion of like, well, are we running on DigitalOcean? Where's our bandwidth coming from? But the point is, like, it's pretty low cost for one node operator to run that server, as opposed to like one giant company like cooling massive farms.
Got it. So what I'm hearing then, just to kind of say it back to you and translate it, is that so like Amazon has a huge server farm and they have the economic benefits because they own it. So it's cheaper for them and then they can sell it to us. And in a decentralized world, it's basically the Amazon server farm in the sky that we get the economic benefit of, and then those cost savings can then be passed on to the users or the creators of that.
Yeah, and it's like, it's node software that, is the mechanism that makes it possible for individuals to run, smaller nodes of computational capacity as part of a global network, right? Like, and that's where I didn't do that, but the protocol developers of Livepeer and other really cool projects have done that, and that's why I think this space is fucking cool.
So what are the economics for Livepeer? Like, how does Livepeer make money then?
Really good question. So there's like the Livepeer network, and then there's like Livepeer Inc., the company. The like economic design of the protocol itself it's a proof of stake protocol. So the Livepeer token is an incentive mechanism to get people to run these nodes on the network, and you get inflationary Livepeer token for validating the network. And then that's like on the supply side of the network. So you can think of the Livepeer network as like a system of supply and demand for video transcoding. So the node operators supply video transcoding through their GPU processors that like they run their nodes with. And then the other kind of actor that's designed in the protocol is a broadcasting node, who is the one that like needs the transcoding capacity. So broadcasters are people who like want to put video on the internet. And then right now on the network, you pay for transcoding in ETH. So node operators get both like Livepeer token as inflationary rewards for running nodes, and they get ETH for doing the transcoding from broadcasters. In terms of it, like Livepeer, the company, like we are effectively a hosted broadcasting node on the Livepeer network, because it actually is not trivial to set up your own broadcasting node, and not everyone wants to do that. And so for developers who are looking to just put basic video features in an application, whether that's like live streaming or video on demand functionality, we have an API that makes it super easy to just plug that in to your application. And the people using the API are not just Web3 projects. And Livepeer has been around since 2017. And the first customers were in, Web2. And like in the early days before I joined Livepeer, like when they were like going to market with this, they'd like go out to Web2 companies and not tell them that it was crypto that was like powering this, because they didn't need to know. Like all they need to know is like, it's 10 times cheaper, it's still just as reliable than any other service. But like now, that the Web3 application ecosystem is starting to grow, and like people are like, the crypto space as a whole has moved from like ICO to like layer one's getting adoption. Like we're really excited right now to support the development of Web3 based video applications. And so there's still a cost. Like if you want to pay for Livepeer, the use of the Livepeer API, it's free up to 1,000 minutes a month, and then there is a cost that kicks in, but it's still like a lot lower. And the point is like at scale, your bill's going to be 10x cheaper.
So Livepeer makes so there's the Livepeer network, right? And then there's Livepeer, like kind of like the API side. So the API side is how you're essentially making money. You're not making money off of the network though, correct?
Yeah, that's right. We're like a SaaS, like the API is like a SaaS product.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay.
And
So
then that's it. And then there's a whole world around like, what does it mean to be a Web3 API? Like there
yeah.
are, a lot of protocols that are trying to figure out what's the right level of developer tooling. And yeah.
So I love that because this is like a trend that we see whenever we talk to any sort of like Web3 based company. There's always like this sense of like, well, there's something wrong in the Web2 world because there's centralization. So we're going to decentralize it. But it seems like we're always re-centralizing things again. So what's your comment on this thing of like, well, we've created our own network, and we're also like a really big player in that network. So isn't that just like re-centralization again, but maybe at a slightly smaller scale than what is happening right now with Amazon?
Yeah, literally just asked our head of engineering how we're thinking about our API roadmap yesterday. And so I think it's like what are some of the like core principles of building in Web3? It's like not rugging developers. So the idea that in Web2 as a developer you're in a walled garden situation where like you don't really own your code, and like if your app is like reliant on Google or like Amazon and they shut down, then your app's gone.
Hmm.
So like I think we all try and solve that product problem with that design principle in mind, is how do we like not screw devs and give them as much flexibility and autonomy as possible. And then it comes down to choices and like what you like. Again, like Livepeer's bit is video transcoding, and in a Web2 world, like Amazon does the transcoding, it does the storage and hosting, it does the content delivery, and it does a lot of other stuff too. And so in Web3, there's Livepeer, and then for storage, there's Arweave, there's storage, there's IPFS and Filecoin. For social graphs, there's Lens, there's Orbis, there's Farcaster. For decentralized identity, there's Spruce, there's Disco, there's so much. And so I think it's about it's like a hard problem, like to figure out like what the level of abstraction is needed and that developers want. And I think we're just seeing like as more front end developers come into Web3, like they do want more. They don't want to make a lot of decisions,
Mm-hmm.
but they do trust. Like they do trust.
Yeah.
They trust that we've made some good technical choices for them.
So you had said something before of like, well, like rug pulling developers. Sean and I, when we started out coding stuff, we don't really code much anymore, but we had that experience actually with Facebook when there's something called Parse
Oh,
way back when, and then they shut down Parse, and that was very sad. So in this situation with Livepeer, if Livepeer were to shut down, what happens? Does like are devs rug pulled again, or how are they protected?
how are devs protected? Um, if Livepeer were to shut down right now, like where our broadcasting node is set up such that like you wouldn't lose your stuff, and that's part of it, right? Is like those putting those fail safes in place. So yeah, like we can make centralized technical decisions around like the edges, but like the core part of like the data that's passing through the transcoding, um, that that's safe on the network.
Yeah, you mentioned LensTube, which and Lens Protocol, which makes me excited because we've started posting on LensTube, and it's like a really cool experience because it's basically a YouTube clone for Web3, and everything's pretty much the same, right? It's I upload a video, I add a title, add a description, add a thumbnail. The only difference in there is that you have a choice between, I think, IPFS and ceramic or Arweave or something, and you get to choose where the video is stored. Where does Livepeer sit in that process? Because I didn't even know Livepeer was part of LensTube until today.
Ah, cool. Yeah. So LensTube uses Livepeer today for video upload and playback. I think they will be. using the live stream feature soon. And yeah, I like the developer of lens tubes, like Sassy, he would make the choice where he wants to have those videos stored. So, and I think this is where it's also interesting. Like there may be some cases where like Arweave is better than IPFS, like, but yeah, in that case of LensTube, like the developer would be choosing where they want to host.
Got it. And sorry if I didn't hear that correctly, but where is Livepeer in that stack? Like what are you guys providing in the LensTubes experience there?
Oh, so we're doing the transcoding.
Got it. So when I upload, it's going to you guys and then going to IPFS, or kind of how does that work?
So you upload to LensTube, and then that video goes through Livepeer because LensTube is using our API.
Got it.
And so,
Okay.
yeah, for listeners who might not know, like what's transcoding, like why transcoding. So, if you like record a video on your phone, it's most likely not going to be in a format that can be received on any device anywhere in the world at any bandwidth. If you were going to try and put that on the internet, so you like need to transcode the video, which is like basically compressing it and like putting it in a format such that it can be received globally, and you don't get like shitty buffering. You actually like have very good playback quality.
Got it. And that takes a lot of compute, which is where you guys come in and you decentralize that
Yeah, I
compute.
probably
So
should have
it's
said that first. Like that's like that's actually what the
it's all
problem we're
good.
solving is, like actually being able to watch quality videos on the internet.
Got it. Yeah. And
And
transcoding is,
video is like 80% of bandwidth of the internet.
yeah. And we don't think about this, right? Because YouTube, and they just
Yeah.
take care of it, right? Like when I upload to YouTube, I don't know that this happens. It just happens. So
Yeah.
I really want to make sure that I understand this. So I upload on LensTube and it hits you guys first, or does it go to IPFS first?
Also, really good question. So, about 4 months ago, we launched a new feature with decentralized storage playback, which was actually pretty cool because you can imagine a case. I actually don't know. I think Sassy's using this feature in LensTube right now. But yeah, you can imagine a scenario where you want video stored first, playback second.
Got it.
I'm pretty sure he's using this feature right now. So yeah, you would, you know, record your video, upload it to LensTube. What that means is that it actually first goes to decentralized storage, and then it gets transcoded and like basically cached on the Livepeer side, and then it would be played back from Livepeer.
I see. Okay, cool. So you're kind of sitting between the user and IPFS, the decentralized storage,
Yeah,
and just magically
yeah.
in the
Actually,
background.
sorry, it would actually be played back from the storage side, but we would do the transcoding. I'm not a developer like this
Yeah,
is.
no worries.
But the decentralized storage video playback means storage first. We cache and transcode, and then it gets played back from storage.
Cool. I will say my experience on LensTube so far is really great. Like, there's not many issues with video playback, and it's honestly astonishing to me that it works that well.
Cool. We love to hear it. And we're really excited about the Lens ecosystem. Orb, which is an awesome
Yeah.
mobile app.
They just fix video. Is that because they use you?
They just launched with
Great.
Livepeer like yesterday or 2 days ago.
I
Yeah.
noticed that. I was like, it's honestly infuriating because it's one of the only Lens like apps that you can have on your phone. So I literally had it on my phone just to get notifications from the Lens product like ecosystem, but it doesn't play
Ooh.
videos. And so like, yeah, I was so excited when that works yesterday.
Yeah, it's exciting, and we're excited to see a lot more because it's most of our experience online is through video, so that's kind of why we're here.
Yep.
Talking about Lens and LensTube and just all the stuff in general. In the Web2 world, when you weren't paying for the product you were using, it was kind of like that saying of like, you are the product, and Facebook is making that money off of you. YouTube and Google is making that money off of you. In this particular sense, like with Lens and with Livepeer and IPFS and just everything, who is paying for what? Because the stuff costs money, but we're still consuming it. So when you watch a video on LensTube, like what's happening?
Yeah, really interesting question. So, like, application developers have those costs of like putting all of these different like utilities into their stack. So, like, they have to pay for, at scale, they have to pay for Livepeer, they have to pay for Arweave or, IPFS through Filecoin. And so I think the vision is that, because end users are able to monetize on their side, that, developers are going to be able to take a cut of that in a fairer way. And also it goes back to what I said earlier, right? Like that cut is going to be at least 10x smaller than the cut that Twitch and YouTube are taking from creators today. But it does, like, we're all in this because we think the Web3 creator economy is going to create more opportunities for end users to monetize their data, and that, is also going to help what covers the cost. But like, you're not going to have monopolistic, profit seeking, like Google empires. It's like Sassy's running LensTube.
So how do you think that's going to play out if we had to do like a 5 years ago, because I guess now it's like the transition time, right? But if we wanted to do like a then and, or like in the future and now, where today I go on the YouTubes and I watch something and it doesn't cost me anything, but I'm giving away like my data, all the tracking, et cetera, of like what my patterns are. And I don't have any control over what I'm seeing, but it's free to me to consume. So are you saying that in the future, that instead of it being free to users, it's more likely going to be more like a pay for play, and it's just going to be a infinite amount of subscriptions for me to like watch or like to consume media, and most of that's going to go directly to the creators, and then a small piece is going to go to the application developers?
Yeah, I mean, it's a hurdle that exists today, like the idea that I got to do everything for free because I didn't own my data. Because I can own my data, does that mean I have to pay for everything up front?
Yeah.
Like, I think those of us who are like building products in this space, we like also don't want like, that to become a barrier. And the reality is, I think like there are some things that you may want to sell your data for if it means you'll get to do stuff for free. But I think like the fundamental difference between like the old world and the new one is you choose. Like you're given the
So it's
option.
choice. Gotcha.
Yeah. It's consent. Consent is like the name of the game.
I was going to say, because if it's going to be like cable back then and the 20 different subscriptions I have today, it's going to be so much more expensive, and I'm going to forget about what I'm subscribed to. Yeah.
Yeah. And there's like there's already a lot of cool business models around that, right? Like if you, they're like data streamer and like data union or like data DAO. I can't remember what it's called, data union. But yeah, you can imagine like a service where like they will like in a like trustless way kind of hold your data for you, but like abstracted it in a way that they will like help you figure out where are opportunities that you can, if you want to sell your data, they will like sell your data for you. Like that's kind of interesting. I don't know. There might be situations where like, yeah, I know like for this particular use case that there's literally been a data DAO set up to like curate like data use case scenarios. Like maybe, yeah, I want to give that DAO access to like my metadata.
Interesting. Yeah, one thing that I saw yesterday on I think it was on one of the Lens apps. It was kind of like an eye-opening moment of like, oh, like it is kind of to your question too, Thomas, is there's so many more opportunities for like economics to occur here for creators that like we're still building it. We're still trying to figure out how people are going to make money and who's paying for what. And there's this product or protocol called Waves that came out. I don't know if you saw this,
No.
where I can post. So like I could take this podcast, post it on Lens, and use this thing called Waves, and I can allocate a certain dollar amount and say, I'm going to put $100 for this post. And so when I post it, this whole thing that says, I'm offering $100 for anyone who mirrors this post, which is like a retweet in the Web3 world. And you get paid $2 for mirroring it
Mhm.
until the $100 is gone. So it's an incentive for people to interact with my content, and they get
Mm.
paid for it with actual money, which is so cool. And you can set like, you must have a certain number of followers in order to mirror it. So you can set like limits so only influencers can do it and pay them a lot more or something. So I saw that and I just thought that was really cool.
Yeah, that is super cool. That's what's exciting about like the new frontier. Like we are literally figuring out the new games that are possible given the primitives we have. And like that's, again, Livepeer is like back end infrastructure layer, but like we have made a choice like not to go pitch to Web2 companies because we think that literally the future of online applications will be built in Web3 on these primitives.
Yep. So are you like, what percentage of your customers are Web2 versus Web3 businesses?
Um, I mean, we've been around since 2017. Like, again, before Web3 applications existed, which was probably like, I don't know, a year and a half ago, 2 years. Like, it was just Web2. And now, like, we're definitely seeing a growing number of apps using Livepeer. Like you mentioned, LensTube, like Orb. Um, there's some cool Web2 projects that have used Livepeer and that do the Lot Radio, which is like a public broadcaster for DJs in Brooklyn. They use Livepeer. Like we actually did a really cool demo for her, which is a Berlin-based DJ studio. So those are like in the Web2 space. Yeah, we've had some interesting like creator communities use us, but like I think we're seeing a growing number of social applications in the Web3 space use Livepeer.
Got it. And we've kind of danced around kind of what you're doing specifically at Livepeer. Can you kind of, I've never heard of ecosystem growth as a position. And that's kind of the fun part for Thomas and I is we interviewed someone who was head of Web3, and
Yeah.
all these titles that have never existed before. Can you kind of talk about what head of ecosystem growth, what that means and what you spend your time doing?
Yeah. Also, just talked to my boss this morning about what am I doing.
Shannon and I have the same conversation every day.
So
like, what are we doing?
we'll figure it out together here.
Yeah. No, my boss is a CEO and he's great. He's the best boss I've ever had. And what does head of ecosystem growth mean? My first title at Livepeer was head of community and governance because I had actually, prior to joining Livepeer, been working on my own project with a co-founder called Devolution DAO, which was we were trying to build a Discord for DAOs with an underlying like fundamentally composable, extensible, modular smart contract architecture. And at the time when we were building this, a lot of the DAO protocols and tooling were very hard to customize for communities. And so, why am I telling you this? I don't know. It's kind of relevant to my journey in life here. So I was like really interested in governance stuff. So started as head of community and governance and like really working on Livepeer's decentralization roadmap. And like, again, one of the reasons why I love like working at Livepeer and the founders, like we really do care about being a project that exists independent of ink. Like you asked, like, do we care about like devs getting rug pulled? 100%. And like getting a practical decentralization roadmap is part of that. And then, yeah, so I was doing that. And then I just started doing like business development and just being out in the Web3 space. And like, I mean, I'm a hyper connector. Like, I love connecting the dots and like ecosystem, the role of ecosystem is really about being the connective tissue between the points of intersection in any system. And so it's a hard thing to like create like KPIs around, although, partnerships, like, BD, like new leads coming in, like all of those things matter. Like community is also part of it. Like, and I like to think about my role as like chief decentralized growth officer, where like we want to grow adoption of Livepeer and we want to grow demand on the network. And for our node operators, our orchestrator community, so node operators on the Livepeer network are called orchestrators. They also really want demand on the network. They're like, when fees for us. And that, like, I'm an advocate for our community in that sense. Like, who are understanding the stakeholders in the Livepeer network, and like, again, being the connective tissue for those, being able to like sense and seize the opportunities, and like where like I need my colleagues is like helping me to prioritize, like from a business perspective, like what are the most important connective tissues, in a potentially infinite, space of connective tissue. And I like have so much respect and appreciation for my colleagues who tolerate me saying we should, everything is possible. And they're like, no, yes, everything is possible, but like we don't have infinite resources.
Yeah, until the one day that we do have infinite resources, that'll be great. Yeah, because then we could build anything and everything always.
Yeah, I'm not like, the one thing I will say I do not do, because I'm not like great at it, is operations. And I think that, yeah, ecosystem growth, like I think those roles need a really good, like disciplined operator who is able to help, like, bring it back home.
Mm-hmm.
Like what, again, what for this project is most important, given the infinite possibility.
So when you talk about growth over time, as Web3 gets bigger, Web3 was already on financial regulators and just our beautiful government regulators in general radar 10 years ago. And we don't really get the opportunity to talk to many former regulators that then become like crypto lovers, or like
I know,
Web3 lovers. So thank you
yeah,
for being in the.
many of the people currently in this space were like in diapers probably when I was like looking at
Yeah, when you were trying to like squash them. So what do you think? What do you think is going to happen like in the regulation space? Because the financial regulators usually come in first because it's obviously money. But I imagine there's going to be more regulation coming down the line as this becomes more prevalent, because we already see that in today's world with like Web 2, whether that can be like GDPR, ADA, like all these different kind of things that pop up. So what do you think is going to happen in the future for regulation and Web3 in a non-financial sense? We don't really care about like DeFi for this kind of topic, because that's too loaded of a question.
Well, I think DeFi is all regulators understand about Web3. So it will be it is the lightning rod for regulation of the space. And like we're already seeing, I think the rulings around, staking are very concerning, because again, like decentralized compute networks are only possible because of proof of stake protocols, and they only work because you have a delegator community that's, able to, I think, provide some check and balance and centralization of stake, or check against centralization of stake. So we actually, like, along with other Web3 infrastructure projects, like are, trying to figure out how we can lend our voice to this space. And I think like we, as a former regulator and like having been involved in global policy conversations, I think it's a very bad position to be on the defensive all the time. And that's kind of what I see Web3 not kind of getting out of, is the defensive posture. And we need to, as a
Mhm.
space, move towards being more proactive in explaining and showing how what we're doing is good for the world. Like literally, what is the public good in
Mhm.
Web3? Like that's, until we start to tell that story like more often and louder, I'm actually really worried. So um
Do you,
yeah.
do you think that because regulators will eventually just try to like kind of choke it before it becomes like something big? But then there's also the counter argument from their side of being like, well, if it gets too big, we're not going to be able to regulate anything in the first place. And then there's the counter argument to being like, well, what is regulation and this like ethos that doesn't really have clearly defined borders anymore because identities are so asked.
Mm.
I don't know what my question was there, but it
Yeah,
was a
and kind
thought.
of I, what are I'm just thinking about the latest decision from the SEC, right? Like with Kraken, like my first reaction to that was like trying to be hopeful in that, well, maybe they think Kraken is a centralization risk and they're actually okay with investors delegating to smaller independent node operators that like aren't centralization risks. I think that might be a generous interpretation of the intention of that ruling, but I hope, and that's where we have to poke, is like, okay, is there something you understand about what we're trying to do with this project that you think has some value to the public? Like, what is that thing? And let's focus on that and let's work together on that.
Because if I'm understanding this correctly, the fear is that this new SEC regulation that kind of says that we don't like staking, that kind of puts everything at risk that is built
Yeah.
on Ethereum and a network like yours, where staking is like the main piece of the network. That's what secures the network. That's what, stakers get paid from this. So I imagine that's what the fear is.
Yeah, that is absolutely the fear. It's that it's a lack of understanding, right? Like that's when you lobby, like when like doing the work of like government relations, you just want to make sure you're on the same page. And I don't think we're on the same page.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. We'll have to. We have some people that we could introduce you to because we're part of this thing. Thomas, you can talk about it more. Called the ACT App Association.
Yep.
I think that's the acronym.
I hate how there's two names for it, but yeah.
Yeah, I don't understand that either. But yeah, maybe you can talk about it a little bit.
So the App Association, basically, historically, they've worked with Web 2 type companies. So a lot of their larger sponsors are like Apple and Facebook and so forth. But really what they do is represent app developers. And then they advocate through this like trade association to legislators to kind of give the use cases of like why what we're doing in the Web 2 space is so important. But it's really cool to see that slowly shifting into the Web 3 space. And that's like one of the
Oh,
things that gets Sean and I excited too, is finding the use cases, because until they can identify, until legislators, because I have to identify like who the party right here is. But if until legislators can like really understand a story that relates to like why, for example, why internet access is so important and what jobs it creates and what economic benefits it creates and so forth to everybody,
yeah.
until they can really kind of pinpoint that, that's what helps kind of drive legislature. And so I think the more use cases we can give, the more that'll actually help us down the road, especially from the Web3 standpoint.
Yeah, sign me up. I mean, I'm all about trying to connect with those projects and like I think that the more we can show what's good and the good intention.
Yep. Totally agree. So it'll be interesting to follow all the regulation. What's the difference between like how's Canada handling this versus the U.S.? Like I guess I'm not up on the Canadian Web3
Canada's just
laws.
like Canada just waits for the US to handle stuff.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, but
I feel like Canada likes
one,
more rules than the US. Okay. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, Canada, when it comes to crypto, like the banks are kind of the starting point for finance. Like, so first of all, like crypto is still within the financial sector regulatory bucket, which is, I think, part of the problem, right? Like, we're actually talking about industry policy. We're not talking about the financial sector. Like, that's where I'd like to see the conversation move is from like DeFi scammy financial sector regulation to like, no, this is like literally transforming the digital economy so that it's fairer and better for more people. Maybe I should talk more about that this year, actually, is like we're literally like global inequality is probably like the biggest problem we face, like as a human species today. And like what's driving that? It's internet companies who are like responsible for most of the wealth and like don't share it. And literally by like decentralizing ownership of internet companies and internet services, like I think that's what has I really believe that like we can get to a more equal global economy through a decentralized web. I don't know who's saying that to regulators, but
And
someone.
by equal, I think
Can,
it's also like opportunity too. I think just like
Yeah.
more equal opportunity, because you can argue today that there is a lot of opportunity, but there's not a lot to participate at the same level of what the big tech companies operate at, because they create too much of a competitive advantage.
Yeah, totally. Like, when did monopolies become like sanctioned by regulators? You know, a lot of this is around like, again, competition policy, which is why I think this needs to be like an industry and like commerce, department issue rather than, um, a treasury or like financial sector issue.
for someone that may be listening that hears you say that Web3 has the potential to help solve global inequality, can you kind of walk us through how that, like, what does that look like? Like, maybe fast forward 5, 10, 15, however many years that this might take. Like, how is that actually going to happen? I'm
Um,
asking you to solve the world's biggest
yeah,
problem right now.
The silver bullet. We need just one.
yeah, my vision for a better world through Web3. It starts with addressing the concentration of capital and the concentration of wealth and the problem of economic inequality. And two ways you can tackle that. One is you redistribute the pie, and we can talk about how crypto can do that. And the other one is that you grow the pie. And we can also talk about how crypto can do that. And I think like, crypto Web3 has the potential to do both of those things. One is I mean, we're at time. Like, this is like a whole other
Oh
conversation.
man, yeah, I didn't realize we were at the hour here.
Honest to God, I would like, let's have that conversation because I like,
Okay.
and I actually was in impact investing like for a while. And part of, what we do at the World Economic Forum is literally like, how do you take private capital for public good? So, there is at this point, I think it's like literally like $200 trillion like financial gap to achieve the UN sustainable development goals. Like who's
Mm.
going to pay? Who's going to pay to achieve the goals that we've set as a world would make us all better off? And they're like 17. Private capital is looking for ways to affect those, to have an impact on those goals. ESG has been like a total disaster. Like ESG is nothing, but there's still like people with private wealth that like want to have social impact. And I think, again, blockchain and DAOs in particular can do a lot to help redistribute and reallocate capital in like accountable ways. Like this is what like blockchain and crypto communities do through like DAOs is provide an accountability and transparency mechanism for how things get spent and like around the decision making for that. And then there's like on the like growing the pie, I think like that's where creator economy stuff is like super relevant, and there's more to say on that. But like, again, the foundational principle of like people being able to own and monetize their presence online, which is just such a huge part of their lives. Like we're just at the start of that.
Love it. Well, we will absolutely have you on the show again to talk about this because, yeah, it's an interesting topic that isn't being talked about enough. So, Shannon, thanks so much for being on the show. This was a lot of fun.
Thank you guys so much.